You're listening to the Cycling Podcast in association with Rapha. Rapha exists to improve your ride with the finest kit, inspiring stories, and vibrant clubhouses across the globe.
Hello, my name's Richard Muir. I'm with Daniel Friebe.
Hello, Richard. What is that? You threw me there. You put a very strange emphasis on my surname, as though I was some kind of criminal on the loose.
Have you sort of changed the pronunciation of your surname to Friebe?
Friebe, yeah.
You haven't you?
Yeah, I have, yeah. But I don't make a big deal of it. I'm not that precious.
Has that been a conscious decision?
Well, it was a conscious decision. It was a few years ago. I mean, it should always have been pronounced that way. But now, I might
just change the pronunciation of my surname.
To?
I don't know. Murray. Maybe put an accent on the E at the end.
Buffalo Murray.
Just to sound quite exotic. And Lionel Birnie.
Hello, Richard.
Lionel Briney. Sorry, in a giddy mood because we're about to embark on our tour, aren't we, Lionel? We're deep in preparation for that.
Yeah, it's the grand tour of parts of Great Britain. Our book's out in a couple of days' time, and our first event is, as we speak now, is tomorrow night at the Lowry Theatre in Salford. And I mean, if it was a real grand tour, we'd have gone and had a bit of a practice. I suppose this is the practice, isn't it? This is like going and doing laps of the time trial course.
We'd be doing press conferences today, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
But we're not doing that. We are, Salford on the Wednesday, the 28th of February. If by some miracle you hear this before that, come along if you've not already got a ticket. We'll be joined by one of only, I believe, 4 living former world road race champions from Britain. I'll leave you to guess who that might be.
Rich,
yes, Daniel.
You'd be doing press conferences today, and we would probably be saying to the press officer, "Can we just get 2 minutes with him? Just 2 minutes, just maybe in a huddle." And they'd be saying, "Well, no, he's already done proper media,
pre-approved questions only well." Salford on Wednesday the 28th, Edinburgh on March the 1st. That's Thursday. That's actually sold out. That one. Friday the 2nd in Glasgow, Nottingham, London, Leeds and Sheffield next week, where we'll be joined by Daniel Friebe. All the details on thecyclingpodcast.com, but go and get a ticket if you've not got one already, please. Thank you. And our book's out this week, A Journey Through the Cycling World. Through the cycling year, A Journey Through the Cycling Year, sorry. We're excited about that too. I'm just back, fellas, from a freezing cold Belgium. I was over there for the opening cobbled classics of the season, Het Nieuwsblad and Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne. We'll hear my report from those 2 races very soon. But before we do any of that, Lionel, can we have the news roundup, please?
Yeah, well, as we speak, I'm watching Le Samin, the Belgian race.
Your favourite race, Lionel.
Remind me why this is? Why is this my favourite race?
Because it finishes in a town called Dour.
Yeah. I think if it finished in a town called Anxious or a town called, Dow. Yeah, why not? Why not?
In the early days of the podcast, Rich, that barb would have been enough to provoke a walkout from Lionel.
I feel safe because we're recording.
He's come a long way.
Yeah, we have. Although I challenge you to tell me when this fictional walkout was. I don't think there was ever a walkout.
In about a minute.
Anyway, Philippe Gilbert is on his way to victory in this race. Live news roundupping this is a departure, isn't it? There's 7.2 kilometres to go. Will he hang on? We'll probably be able to update people throughout the podcast on what's actually happened in this race. But it's very cold in Belgium, as you said, Richard. I don't want to spoil your report, but we'll talk about Het Nieuwsblad and possibly a little bit of Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne after we've heard your report. But just to round up who won the races, well, there was a Danish 1-2. No, there wasn't. There was a Danish double in the men's and women's editions of Het Nieuwsblad. Michael Valgren of Astana won the men's race, and Christina Sigard won the women's race. Dylan Groenewegen won his 4th race of the season by taking Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne ahead of the French champion Arnaud Demar. The only 2 people who've won more races than Groenewegen this season are Elia Viviani and Alejandro Valverde, who've both won 5. And Valverde's I guess 4th and 5th victories came on the same day because he won the final stage, the uphill finish at Jebel Hafit, or Hebel Hafit. I'm not sure on my Middle Eastern pronunciation there. This was in the Abu Dhabi Tour, and he unseated Rowan Dennis, who had led the race after the previous day's time trial. So Valverde very much back to something approaching his best, certainly winning an awful lot of races already this season. Meanwhile, there's racing going on in the south of France. Romain Bardet is off the mark, having won the Classic d'Ardèche, and Lilian Calmejean had a great weekend because he was third behind Bardet there, and then the following day he won the Drôme Classic. Next up, it's the Strade Bianche in Tuscany, and with Europe in the grip of the beast from the east, is that what we're calling it? The snow's falling all over the place. We do know.
Isn't it about 6 degrees in London and people are panicking? That's what I read. I read in the Evening Standard the other day.
Yeah, it's a bit colder than that, I think.
Bit parky.
There's been quite a bit of snow where I am in Not Watford this afternoon. But one thing we can be sure of is that there will be white roads at the Strade Bianche come what may, because that's the race with the dusty, gravelly farm tracks. Looking forward to that one. A little bit of news away from the racing is that the Hammer Series is going to be back this summer with not one but 2 events. These are the quite quirky variations on road racing founded by Velon, the consortium of some of the World Tour teams, not all of them. Last year it was in Limburg in the Netherlands, and the race will return there from June the 1st to the 3rd. And before that, there'll be a 3-day Hammer Series race in Stavanger in Norway from May the 25th to the 27th. Really interested in the timing of that because it clashes with the final weekend of the Giro d'Italia, which I think's a strange move. Obviously, it's been organised on that weekend because, well, that must be the only date when they can make it happen. But to clash with the 2 big mountain stages of the Giro is a strange move for some of the, for an event that is effectively run and owned by some of the biggest teams. But maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Indeed. Should we cross straight over to Belgium, to me in Belgium? Should I hand over to myself in Belgium?
Go for it.
And then we'll come back and talk a bit about these races and all these other things.
Dames en heren, uw applaus voor AG2R. 3, 2, 1. Dames en heren, jullie applaus voor Quickstep Floor. Jens Keukelaere, Lars Bak, Laurens Naassen, Jelle Waal.
We were played in there with some of the sounds from the start of Het Nieuwsblad in Ghent on Saturday. That was in the Citadel Park, specifically in the Kuip Velodrome, home, of course, to the Ghent 6-day. We've podcasted from there before, and I have to say the Velodrome was as packed with spectators as it is for any night of the 6-day. Very impressive atmosphere in there as the teams were presented one by one, men's and women's teams, where a team had a men's and a women's team that came on stage together, but they were mixed up, which was nice to see. 24 hours later, I am in Kuurne for the finish of Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne. It is absolutely freezing. My hands almost didn't work to turn on my recorder. It's that cold. But I'm surviving. I'm walking towards the team buses. We're in the final 10 kilometres of a race that always feels a bit after the Lord Mayor's parade after Het Nieuwsblad. I don't know why, but it's because it's in the heart of Flanders as well. But it feels quite low-key compared to Het Nieuwsblad, Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne. Not the same sort of iconic race. And one for the sprinters, and it has to be said that the top sprinters, most of them tend to be competing in Abu Dhabi this week. So it's not the greatest field, but we're awaiting what we expect will be a bunch sprint here. Yesterday, a solo win by Michael Valgren, the Danish rider. It was a Danish double because Christina Segaard was a surprising winner of Women's Het Nieuwsblad. And as the riders came across the line, I spoke to Valgren's Astana teammate and fellow Dane, Magnus Kort Nielsen. Asked him as well about the reports of Astana's financial difficulties. Alexander Vinokurov had said in an interview on Friday that the situation was critical as regards that team because funding hasn't come through from the Kazakhstan government. So they've been riding very well, Astana, and we wonder if there's a connection there, that there's a sense in the team that they might be riding for their futures. Anyway, Valgren was the winner. I spoke to Magnus Kort Nielsen just as he came across the line. Here he is at the finish of Het Nieuwsblad. Win for the team there today.
Yes, yeah, fantastic. Very nice win for Valgren. I know him very well. We've been teammates in the past before, and I'm extremely happy for him.
I mean, strength and numbers in that front group.
Yeah, they had. So I was not there, but 3 guys out of 11, as I understood it, is of course very, very good. And but you still have to be able to pull it off, and they were. And I don't know exactly. Yeah, he rode solo, but just he's so strong, and it's really, really good.
A double for Denmark today. Segaard won the women's race as well.
Oh, nice one, yeah.
A few reports about problems at Astana with money. Has that been something the riders have been aware of?
We got an email informing us about the situation. But I have full confidence that they will handle it, and they say they have things under control. And
you've been reassured it's going to be okay?
I believe it will be okay, yes.
That was Magnus Kort Nielsen. His Astana teammate Michael Valgren was the winner, of course. And here's what he said in the press conference speaking to a reporter from Dutch television.
Tell about the moment that you decided to go, because you were 3 of the Astana team in the leading group. What can you say about the game and the moment you attacked?
Yeah, like we were 3 guys, and Oscar and Lusenko are super fast, and they are faster than me, so they had to choose a wheel in the sprint, and it was up to me to try to attack. And I tried one time, but Stiba, he was really active of closing it down, and also when Van Marke he was also there straight away. And then I came from behind, and then I knew it was a super good moment because Van Marke did a good attack, and then I could counter attack on that. And then with the headwind, when you get like just 10 meters, who's going to close the gap, because it takes some...
Did you feel immediately that it was the right moment?
Actually, I did, because when you come from behind and you can see that nobody is following, and that was a good attack before, you know it's a good attack. And but then again, the last K was really long, because it was a hard race, and my legs were burning, but I had a good yell from the sports director and the other guys in the back. So it was special. Yeah.
The fact that the Astana team did a real good job today, a really strong ride from all the team. Does the financial problems of the team, do they have a connection with it?
Are we riding strong? Or
yeah.
No, I don't think so. We've been riding strong all season, and of course it's good that we perform. So maybe it's making it more easy for getting new sponsors or whatever is happening. Like I said before, I'm not worried about the financial situation. We'll see what will happen.
Are you not worrying?
No.
No?
Why should I?
I don't know. Maybe if the team collapsed, that's not a good thing.
Nah, but I don't think it will collapse. I'm 100% sure that it will continue. So I'm not worried.
Michael Valgren, the winner, somebody who was very active in the race and extremely strong on the Muur, attacked really hard up there, was Sepp Van Marke, the Belgian rider on Team Education First, Cannondale. Van Marke has gone so close. He's won that race in the past, but he's been knocking on the door of a major classics win for a few years. Could this be his year? I spoke at the finish to Andreas Kleer, his director sportif at Education First, German former rider who knows these races and these roads extremely well. Here's what Andreas Clear had to say. Sepp was obviously one of the strongest guys in that group, but it was difficult. Was it the headwind, or was there anything else he could have done?
I don't think he could have done anything else, right? We gave it a try on actually already on the boundaries, which isn't his climb, and he was able to follow the best one, so we knew he had a good day. And from that, we just asked him to survive Falkenberg and just concentrate only on the Muur. And he gave his best, and I think it was not because I work in this team, but it was very impressive, very impressive. And I just take that with me, and I think the riders too, once they have time, look a little bit on YouTube. If they see that once, I think we can go upright into the next races.
So you take a lot of confidence from that, and the rest of the team as well, that he's obviously in great shape and looking, a bit further down the road at the other big classics.
Yeah, yes. But on the other hand, I have to say, if you look at Astana, if you look at other teams, right, they're not far away, or he isn't above them, right? So the class here is spread pretty wide, and each of those races can have a surprising winner. Hopefully it's once us, right? You know these roads extremely well, of course, famously well. What do you know this finish well? What do you think of this as the finish Het Nieuwsblad? I think it's beautiful, right? I think also the riders enjoyed it. Also in the car, it's kind of a different feeling because it's like a thriller. The long bits in between the Tenbosse to the Muur, and then from the Muur Bosberg to the finish, make that race really interesting, right? You can gamble, have a sprint in the back group, maybe catch the first, and. It's like pure racing. It's very nice. I'm not saying that the other parcours wasn't nice, right? But it's just a beauty of a race, actually, I have to say. I mentioned that Christina Segaard was the winner of the women's race, Team Virtue cycling rider. Unexpected victor, it's fair to say. A big group came into the finish there. There had been a split on the Muur, and about 6 riders went clear. Corn Rivera was there. Alexis Ryan was also there, the Canyon SRAM rider, and she popped up at the finish with a very good second. Alexis Ryan, familiar to listeners to the cycling podcast or friends of the cycling podcast, because she kept an audio diary for us at the Tour of California last year. Very entertaining it was too. But second at Het Nieuwsblad is a real breakthrough performance for her. And I spoke to her at the finish. Here is Alexis Ryan. Alexis, you must be delighted. I mean, that's a terrific result today, second.
Yeah, I am really happy. I was targeting this race to actually win, but second is still pretty good, I think, for the first race of the season. So, and it shows that I'm on good form. We didn't see a lot of it, unfortunately, but saw a clip going over the Muur, and there was a split there. Were you? I think you were in that split, were you? Yeah, I was in that front group. It was me, Eliza, Ellen Van Dijk, Annemiek, Chloe. So it was a pretty select group, and I was really happy to be there. So that made me confident for the sprint. But I think, the Muur and the Bosberg, they did take a little bit out of me because I did try to go with the front group. So once it came down to the sprint, Christina just had more than I did. What do you know about her? We don't know too much about her. I've been racing with her. I remember her from my junior days, racing world championships. So I know she's always been a good sprinter. I obviously wasn't expecting her to make it all over all the climbs, but she obviously did really well and conserved energy. And she came by me in the saddle. I don't even think she came out. She's just so powerful. So as I mentioned, I'm at Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne now on Sunday. That's the generator you hear in the background. I'm just walking past the generator, keeping these fries and the frites and the sausages warm for people on this freezing cold day. Walking towards the team buses. This morning I spoke to Ben Swift, the British rider on Team UAE Emirates. Surprisingly, his first time riding Het Nieuwsblad yesterday, and the first time he's ridden Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne as a senior. He rode the junior race many years ago. Here is Ben Swift at the start. How did you find it yesterday, Ben?
Yeah, no, it was good. I actually had really good legs. I enjoyed the experience. I think my inexperience showed a little bit. I was arriving in position maybe slightly too early and then getting caught out on the wave. But I could move up in like the hardest sections, like regain the position. So I think that showed I had good legs. And then just before the Muur, there was that crash with Bling, and then there was another one in the middle of the road. And the guy in front of me braked really hard, and I was like left foot on the other side of his wheel, on his back. By the time you get re-going again, they're obviously sprinting to the bottom of the Muur, and that was game over then. I tried to come back, but,
Yeah, it surprised a lot of people that you've not ridden that race before, and these races more generally. Is there a reason for that? I know you've had, obviously, problems with your shoulder and so on. Is it a fear of the danger of the cobbles?
I think for me, it's in Sky we had a really strong classics team, and at this time of year I was riding track worlds as well. So I had other goals. I always performed quite well in the Basque Country, and that kind of suited me a little bit more. And it was just something that never really excited me too much. It's like yesterday I enjoyed it, but then I didn't. It's not like I loved it, but I did enjoy it, and I think I'm excited for the rest of the classics campaign. Obviously there's a massive risk involved in it, but I think that's just cycling in general these days. It is becoming more and more risky, but I think, like yesterday I was speaking to Stannard a lot. He's obviously got a lot of history in this race, and he knows these races like the back of his hand, so I was just speaking to everyone that I could to get as much experience.
Has it given you a taste for it then? I mean, when you say your classics campaign, what will that involve this year? Obviously Milan-San Remo was the big one, I guess, but after that, what will you ride?
Yeah, no, so I do pretty much the full classics. At the moment I won't be starting in Roubaix, so I'll do E3 against Welgem, Dwars Doors and Flanders. Not Roubaix at the moment, because then I'll come back for Amstel before taking a little bit of an easier time before we decide what Grand Tour. So yeah, I mean, obviously we've still got Christoph to come in. I think he'll be a massive advantage, because also in these races it's so stressful and it's kind of hard to hear the radio, especially when Italian's not my first language. I understand it, but when you're under stress and stuff like that and you're concentrating, maybe you miss what they say. So with Alex there, he speaks really good English and he knows the races like the back of his hand, so hopefully that'll help me a lot more, and then we'll have a couple of cards. Obviously he's our leader in those races. He's a proven leader, and I'm massively inexperienced, but I think yesterday being in that, it was a strange race yesterday because we still had a massive group coming into the final, but like I say, I felt comfortable, so hopefully it's another couple of weeks, the form will continue to improve. And
so it's Ben Swift looking ahead to Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne this morning, into the final 5 kilometres, and I'm amused to see a 3-man group just clip off the front. It includes Julien Vermont, now riding for Dimension Data. I was in a bar in the centre of the town here earlier with some members of the Julien Vermont fan club. One of them had been to school with him. Fair to say that at about midday they were a little bit the worse for wear, but they were very excited about Vermont's prospects in this race, and said that he had promised them if he wins he would pop into the bar later on. I'm sure he imagined that would be quite a long shot. I'm not sure what kind of state they're going to be in now, but Vermont off the front, riding well. Who knows, it could be on. Well, Julien Vermont did not win. He was swept up, and there was a bunch sprint, as we expected. And as we expected, Dylan Groenewegen was the winner. Arnaud Demar seemed to go a little bit early, and Groenewegen, who I don't think had his nose in front all day, but his team rode well when they had to just keep things together. He won the race. At the finish, I waited, becoming colder and colder at the Quick-Step team bus. Quick-Step had a really disappointing weekend. They are obviously Belgium's marquee team, the top team, but the 2 top Belgian teams, Lotto Soudal as well, had a pretty blank weekend. So anyway, I waited at Quick-Step, where their top man, Fernando Gaviria, didn't finish the race because he was still suffering from the effects of a crash at Het Nieuwsblad. And I spoke to their sports director, Wilfred Peters. I understand Gaviria had a problem after crashing yesterday, so he was still struggling with that today, was he?
Yeah, yesterday was a crash about with the water bottle in the descent of the Muur, but before it was not 100%. And for that we say, okay, let's wait and see, and today it was not 100%, and you stop the race.
I guess that affects your game plan for a race like today? Because he would have been your obvious leader here.
Yeah, sure, okay. We control the race in the beginning, and then afterwards we have a situation like that. We have done in a good situation Richiesi with a flat tire, no neutral cars behind, and then we lose them also. Then we need to go in a final with 5 riders without the sprinter, and it's more hard.
Is it a frustrating weekend for you? Are you happy with Gilbert? Looked good yesterday, and he was quite aggressive.
I mean, he make a good result. For me, I'm more happy about Stibar. He make a good race. Gilbert was a little bit sick the week before, and okay, he make the 5th place. The result was better than his condition.
Looking ahead to Milan-San Remo, you've got another couple of riders to come in for that. You've got an awful lot of options in a race like that. Have you thought already about that race and about how the team might play things there?
We have a strategy. I mean, we need to speak 2 days before what we go do on that race. We have more than one guy can win, and hopefully we have a good tactic.
You have 4 guys who can win, maybe.
Yeah, we need only one.
Chute à l'arrière du peloton. Cycling podcast team car at the back of the pack, please.
From a freezing cold Belgium to a thank you to Harry's, who are sponsoring this week's episode and offering you, the listener, a trial shaving set for £3.95 if you go to harrys.com/cycling. That's Harry's without an apostrophe, of course.
I'm a bit too beardy to sample their wares, Richard, but I understand you've taken delivery of a pack which contains a Harry's razor and shaving products.
I mean, I don't think you can be too beardy to use a razor, Lionel. But anyway, that quibble aside, I think you did actually get your pack, didn't you? But it's probably found a good home. I did get my Harry's trial set, razor head with its 5 German-engineered steel blades, shaving gel, protective cover, all delivered to my door. It is a beautiful razor, and it does give a very close shave, maybe a little too close for the Arctic temperatures of Belgium at the weekend. So my face over there was very cold, but as smooth as a cyclist's legs. I mean, you wouldn't understand any of this, Lionel, but having a good heavy razor, weight is important, and the Harry's razor really is reassuringly solid. It's one of life's real pleasures.
You say I wouldn't understand this, Rich, but I have no hair to speak of, so I'm already
losing
losing
your head.
I'm losing a lot of heat through the top of my head, so I compensate by having a bit of coverage on the bottom half of my face. It also covers up half of my face. But taking delivery of a new razor, is it a bit like getting a new bike?
Very similar, very similar.
So a reminder to the listeners out there that you can get started shaving with Harry's today by claiming your trial set for £3.95. In the process, you can support our podcast and get your trial set delivered to you. It includes a razor handle, 5-blade cartridge, foaming shave gel and travel blade cover. You need to go to harrys.com/cycling right now. That's harrys.com/cycling.
The Rapha Cycling Club is the largest global community of its kind. Members share their passion for the road through rides, events, exclusive club kits and racing. Find out more at rapha.cc.
Thank you very much indeed to our main sponsor, Rapha. I mentioned earlier that our tour starts Wednesday. We are doing a book signing at the Rapha Cafe in Manchester at 5 p.m. on Wednesday the 28th of February. It's very unlikely that you're listening to this before then, but you might be and living in the Manchester area. And if you are, do come along and you can be the very first purchaser of our new book because it's released on Thursday, but copies will be available in Rapha in Manchester. And we are, as ever, very grateful to Rapha for sponsoring the Cycling Podcast. Thank you. Now, fellas, we heard before that my report from very cold Belgium. I was dressed up, I was wrapped up pretty warmly. It doesn't sound like it, but it was so unbelievably cold. And my usual very strict rule that no major races should be worn by riders wearing leg warmers or tights. I have to say I softened my stance on that, and I was open to that possibility. And I think, well, certainly Saturday's race was won by Michael Valgren wearing leg warmers. It was a bit of a tactical masterclass, I suppose, by Astana in that race. And we heard from Wilfred Peters at the end there, the sports director at Quickstep. You know, they've had an extraordinary start to the season. Quickstep, lots of wins in various hot places. And it's a bit of a recurring theme, isn't it? That Quick-Step, the Classics team, do often fail to deliver on home soil while winning, being very prolific elsewhere.
I think historically Rich have struggled in this opening weekend, but that hasn't necessarily had any bearing on how they've done in the rest of the Classics campaign. I mean, this year obviously they're missing Boonen and they've got high hopes for Gaviria, but I mean, you just look at their lineup and perhaps they're missing a finisher, I would say, in their Classics lineup. Gilbert was that finisher last year, but I don't think Stibar has consistently finished races when he's been in a winning position in the last few years, and neither has Terpstra. And I think Yves Lampert is still perhaps maybe a year or two away from the point where he's going to be a contender in the very biggest races. So I would see that as their big problem, but that's not to say, you know, they're not gonna come away with one of the big ones. I would suggest that particularly the Tour of Flanders would suit the sort of the assortment of options that they've got. And of course, you know, you talked there with Fitter, Wilfred Peters, about Milan-San Remo. We've already talked about the fantastic options they've got in that race. And, you know, Alaphilippe was riding superbly in the Gulf at the weekend in Abu Dhabi, one of the strongest riders on a mountaintop finish. So I think they're pretty well covered, I would suggest.
Well, Richard, we have to interject here, or I have to interject here to correct myself because I got the winner of Les Samin wrong, astonishingly, seeing as it was unfolding on the television in front of me. But this is the problem with multitasking, isn't it? I mean, I was trying to concentrate on the podcast, trying to watch the bike race. I got the wrong Quick-Step rider. I thought it was Philippe Gilbert up the road winning the race, but it wasn't. Nicky Terpstra was actually ahead of him. But they're all...
They look similar in all that gear, don't they?
Yeah, head to toe in Quick-Step blue and, you know, long
they're
sleeves.
All members, and they're all wolves, aren't they? They're all members of the wolf pack. I don't know where that's come from, by the way. That's a subject for another podcast.
That's a Brian Holmism, isn't it? The wolf pack.
Yeah.
He calls them the wolf pack. Now they're
Not
selling.
Sure. They've got it on their bikes.
Yeah,
got it on their bikes.
They have wolf pack T-shirts. I think you can get in the Quick-Step shop, which I think they've
Pop-up
opened.
store.
Yeah.
Kortrijk, I think.
Yeah.
Does getting the winner of the race wrong? Does that come under your 60% accuracy ambition?
Oh dear. Well, my defence is it's early in the season. You know, by the time we get to the Giro, I'll be flying. I'll be on possibly 72% accuracy by then, hopefully, which will even everything out across the year. But yeah, that's a lesson to us, or a lesson to me. Don't try and be smart and do a rolling live news roundup, watching the race, not knowing who's up the road. But it was a bit, Quick-Step Floors, it was a bit like a Champions League contender toying with a sort of lower division team in the FA Cup, wasn't it? They really went into that race with all their big guns, and anything less than a victory would have been, it wouldn't have pleased Patrick Lefevre, would it? But Nicky Terpstra won that, Philippe Gilbert
You sure about
second. I'm pretty sure about that now.
I was going to ask Napalm what he made of a lot was made of Omloop Het Nieuwsblad at the weekend, borrowing the old finale of the Tour of Flanders, the much sort of fated and yearned for finale of the Tour of Flanders, which ceased to be the finale in what year was it, Napalm? 2012 or 2011, around about that time?
2011, I think, was the last year before they went to the circuit.
I think you're right.
The Finnish moved to Oudenaarde.
And I thought...
Yeah, my thought, I actually thought of you, Daniel, as I was watching it on Saturday afternoon, because I think the riders didn't know what effect those climbs were going to have in a race where the finish line comes after 200 kilometres rather than 260, and I think that's something that we all kind of perhaps overlook a little bit, the way a race will play out. Richard made the point about the headwind, that stretch really from the top of Tenbosse to Gerardsberg, and there's a lot of kind of open main road in that bit, and then again there's a lot of open, not quite so main road, but still quite open land from once you get out of Gerardsberg and to the Bosberg, and then particularly from the Bosberg to the finish in Ninova, it can be very difficult. It's in the Tour of Flanders in the past, we've seen that as being the point where really, really strong riders, I'm thinking back to, say, the days when Stein de Volder, for example, went away and held people off on that run-in. It's a real strong man's finish, and of course it's early in the season, bitterly cold. If it's headwindy as well, and perhaps 200 kilometres, not quite enough for that finale to really bare its teeth, I guess. So it didn't quite work. But then again, a lot of those riders, how many of them, 2011 is quite a long time ago. Some of those riders won't have really experienced that kind of finish at the pointy end of a race and may not have known what was in store for them. So it's probably one that will improve in the next couple of years, and we'll see the riders get to grips with it.
Stein de Volder, incidentally, still riding, 38 years old. He rode on some warming down after the finish on Saturday at Het Nieuwsblad. Don Bonen actually stopped and had a chat with him on his way to meeting up with his new team, Lotto Soudal.
Rich,
he's taking on a technical role there.
What was the chat about that at the weekend? Because it shocked me, and to a certain extent. However, I spoke to Brian Holm, the Quick Step Director Sportif at the Tour of Dubai a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about Boonen and the fact that he'd sort of disappeared from the kind of the scene and the environment around Quick Step since he retired last year, and that hadn't really surprised Brian Holm. I think Boonen before he retired had suggested that he wanted to sort of stay in touch with the team, stay in contact, maybe have a role. That hadn't been the case, and he hadn't really shown an awful lot of interest in Quick Step in the latter part of last year.
It reminds me a little bit of the situation Miguel Indurain at Benesto when he retired on a bit of a sour note, and he'd been in that team his whole career, and it was a sort of falling out that led to his retirement, really. I'm not saying it's the same with Tom Bonen. Maybe, I don't know. I don't really have an insight, although I stayed at the weekend with Tim Harris, who knows the Belgian scene very well. I think his father-in-law, is it his father-in-law or his father, works for Ridley Bikes, and that is one of the reasons how he's got involved in Lotto Soudal. I think the role with Lotto Soudal is pretty minimal. It's not a big role at all, and it was quite surprising to see him presented in the press conference before the race, because that certainly left a lot of people with the impression that it was a big role, but I don't think it is. But symbolically, it's quite a big deal, I think, and it just shows once again how little sentiment there is in professional cycling or professional sport, because he's been so synonymous with that team and its successes over the years. Maybe he was wanting too much, I don't know. I mean, Patrick Lefevre played it down. He said he was too busy with his cars now because he's moved into motor racing. Tom Bonen. So on the one hand, it's not a big role that he's got with Lotto Soudal, but on the other hand, symbolically, it's pretty significant that he's working for the great Belgian rival team rather than the team that he spent most of his career with.
Just to throw the same question back at you, Daniel, what did you make of it on Saturday?
I always feel that you can only learn a very limited amount from this weekend as far as the classics are concerned, and the route itself. I mean, I feel that it's too fondly remembered, that finishing circuit. I mean, it wasn't always, or that finishing course over the Muur and then the Bosberg. It wasn't always great racing. I think visually the Muur is fantastic because it's easily identifiable, it's iconic from a visual point of view, and I think that probably plays a bigger role in elevating it in people's estimations than what actually consistently occurred there. I mean, this last weekend did sort of typify or demonstrate that, in the sense that there was a huge, spectacular, a nuclear attack by Sepp van Marke. He was literally glowing. It was that nuclear. No double entendre intended. Just a fairly lame reference to their neon.
Because he was wearing
kit.
A vivid pink.
But it was too. I mean, I think he felt that it was too far from the finish to go away on his own, and he sort of waited, looked over his shoulder, and looked to see if Stybar was coming over, and ultimately they didn't really get together, and it was too far from the finish. Probably, the headwind as well was playing on his mind. But I don't think, necessarily that told us too much about what's going to be happening in the bigger race in a few months' time. I mean, Sepp van Mark is kind of the Peter O'Toole of professionals, of the classics, in the sense that Peter O'Toole always cleaned up at the Golden Globes and never won an Oscar, and Sepp van Mark is a bit like that as far as
brilliant
Omloop and the Tour of Flanders.
I can't. I mean, they have absolutely nothing else in common that I can really think of.
They're quite tall. Was Peter O'Toole not quite tall?
Strapping Belgian.
Was he not quite tall? I don't know.
Our old colleague Brendan Gallagher's got a good Peter O'Toole story.
I should say that Peter O'Toole did win an honorary Oscar it was only a few years ago, actually, but he never won one when he was actually acting. So maybe Sepp van Mark will win an honorary Tour of Flanders in about 50 years' time.
Glad you cleared that one up, Daniel. Excellent.
Rich, one other thing I wanted to mention as regards Valgren's victory at the weekend. It was interesting to hear him talk on Sports on the Belgian channel, actually, after the race about how a couple of years ago he never imagined that he would do well and in this kind of race, and he was really a rider for the Cobbled Classics. But he did them last year and actually surprised himself. And I've noticed a bit of a theme developing. Riders of his ilk, or riders of his build, and riders of his sort of pedigree, riders you would associate more with hilly Ardennes classics. A few of them have, I think, surprised themselves in the last few years by, if not thriving, then certainly doing okay on the cobbles. Gilbert himself, I mean, he'd always looked good early in his career on the cobbles, but then he sort of went away for a few years to concentrate on the Ardennes, then came back. Kwiatkowski, we've seen, I would say you'd put him in that category. And a couple of others who caught my eye at the weekend, Lutsenko being one, a rider who's tended to go well in stage races and on hilly courses in the past. And then Tim Wellens as well is going to give it a bit of a go this year on the cobbles. And they were sort of typical. He was a typical Tim Wellens ride really on Saturday. He looked very, very powerful, but didn't necessarily choose the right moments to launch his attacks. But maybe a bit of a theme there, to something to keep our eye on.
The Cycling Podcast is supported by Science in Sport. Science in Sport. Fueled by science.
Mr. Syed, where would you like to see this race in 10 years? What's your vision for how this race will look in 10 years?
The first start of the Tour de France or Belgium or Giro d'Italia, we are following where they are end, not where they are start. So our dream to bring this tour, one of the biggest tour in the world.
Who was that, Daniel?
That was the Secretary General of the Dubai Sports Council, Saeed Harib, bearing some very good news from Lionel's point of view, and namely that the Tour of Dubai, as far as he's concerned, is going to be as big as the Tour de France in a few years.
Well, we'll get Lionel's view on that in a second. Before we do, Lionel, can just prepare yourself to give us your view on that, please. Thank you very much to our other sponsor, Science and Sport. And a reminder that you can get 25% off all your Science and Sport products at scienceandsport.com if you enter the code SISCP25. SISCP25. Thank you very much indeed to Science and Sport. And also a reminder that we're collecting questions from you, the listeners, to put to their experts. We've got loads, but we still want more. And you're going to hear the answers to those questions throughout the year. We'll be meeting them soon with the questions. Send your questions to contact@thecyclingpodcast.com. Contact@thecyclingpodcast.com. Any questions relating to sports nutrition, either your own or that of the pros. So, in this final part, we were going to turn our attention to the desert. And
penultimate, Rich, is it? Not penultimate?
No, it's final part.
Oh,
Daniel.
Okay.
Why, did you have something up your sleeve for a final part?
I thought it was going to be a game of three halves today.
Well,
anyway.
It has been, Daniel, if you pay attention. This is the third half.
Okay.
Come on, don't give the impression that this is not all very, very well thought out and planned. Lionel, what do you think of that? Dubai Tour be as big as Tour de France in a couple of years?
It's the end of the desert swing, isn't it, Rich? That's what we want to know from Lionel. If these three races in the desert this year, the Dubai Tour, Tour of Abu Dhabi, Tour of Oman, whether they've convinced you, Lionel, that the future of professional cycling is in the Persian Gulf in February?
Well, I think there's no problem with a so-called desert swing. I've often said on the podcast, if there was a bit more cohesion, it's starting to happen, isn't it? If there was, say, another stage race in Australia after the Tour Down Under, and then sort of stopping off in the Middle East on the way home. Obviously, it's not going to be the same riders aren't going to do everything, of course, but from a logistical point of view, would make it. It would make sense for teams in terms of staff and resources, perhaps. But in terms of the actual racing, I mean, I thought that the Tour of Oman, there were some moments. I thought the final stage of Abu Dhabi was just predictable, really. I mean, my big issue. There's not a problem with having races that are dominated by sprinters at this time of year. These are kind of warming up for classics and even looking further ahead to the Grand Tours, to the Giro and so on. It's all feeding in the same direction. But I think from the point of view of an actual spectator sport, expecting people to make a date with their television set to watch some of this racing, I think it needs to be more creative. It needs to be there needs to be something more to it, because particularly Abu Dhabi was just it was the same flavour of the same thing. It was sprinting, a time trial and an uphill stage, and I think that shows a bit of a lack of imagination. And without wanting to just nick the Hammer Series ideas, I think that there's actually more room for different types of racing, different formats in these events at the start of the season, when everyone's kind of just getting going and everyone's enthusiastic to see everyone back in action, than perhaps when it's, particularly now we see that one of the Hammer Series races is overlapping with the Giro. And so I think, a kind of a C- in terms of televisual entertainment. Certainly from my point of view, there was a day when they were just trundling along in the desert, and the desert was actually very nice to look at, but as a sporting event on a big wide road, a very straight road, I was switching between that and the curling at the Winter Olympics, and finding myself lingering much longer on the curling than on the cycling, and that's not great, is it really? Now, I might be very particular.
Well, it's good for your curling podcast that you're about to launch.
The curling podcast, yeah. Well, and I appreciate, the Winter Olympics is there's the novelty value to it. It's the pinnacle of winter sports and so on and so on. And the Abu Dhabi Tour is not the pinnacle of the cycling season. But I just think that there needs to be I don't want to say an injection of something, because that's the wrong analogy to use. But there needs to be.
We've already had it. We've already had a glowing nuclear Set Van Mark. We don't want to get in any more trouble.
Yeah, they've tried that. They've tried that before, Lionel.
But yeah,
didn't work.
It's these are tune-up races, aren't they, for the riders as much as anything? And that's fine. They have a function. But as a televisual event, I just think you're not compelling anyone to watch it, really. There's nothing about it that makes you think, well, I must make a date with that again at the same time tomorrow.
Apart from the fact there are absolutely no spectators means you can actually hear sometimes what the riders are saying. I heard a conversation between Luke Rowe and Theo Geoghegan-Hart last week while they were riding at the front of the bunch, and there was a famous incident which we've not actually mentioned yet, I don't think. Tom Dumoulin. I
was going to say, you could hear
meltdown.
Tom Dumoulin acting like a sort of, or sounding like an 8-year-old whose fountain pen had linked all over his books in his rucksack on his way to school. It was quite endearingly petulant, wasn't it?
Poor Tom Dumoulin. I mean, I feel a bit sorry for him, because he will. as soon as you saw that, you knew it would be made into a GIF within seconds, and it's something that will probably haunt him for quite a long time now. And he just lost it. And it's what we quite like about Tom Dumoulin is he's quite emotional, isn't he? And he does sometimes come out with whatever's on his mind. He did it at the Giro last year a few times. You don't want him to become all buttoned up and unexpressive, but that was a little bit embarrassing, and he won't look back on that with any kind of pride whatsoever, I don't think.
And just on the racing front, Rich, I mean, one really interesting takeaway from my point of view from the desert races was the struggles of Marcel Kittel when he came back from Dubai. suggested that they were Marcel Kittel's struggles and not his team's, not his lead outs. I thought his lead out.
Is that because you sat beside his lead out man
for 6 hours on the flight home? He was actually very diplomatic. Marco Haller, we're talking about the Austrian rider. But I think Kittel himself has not explicitly, but sort of hinted that he has been the problem in these races. I mean, he's talked about his form not quite being there yet, and it doesn't need to be at this point in the season. But I would still have expected him to snaffle a couple of stages between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, but that hasn't been the case.
He went very close, didn't he? But not quite.
Just to clarify and head off anyone who thinks I'm criticising the notion of racing in the Middle East, I'm not at all. I just think that the style of racing, there's such an opportunity here to do something different and to make something that people tune into, if nothing else, for a bit of novelty value, like, well, what's going on? And without nicking the Hammer Series idea, but if you're going to have a 120 kilometre or 150 kilometre race on a more or less straight road, why not turn it into almost like a points race and have a sprint every 10 kilometres and at least keep the interest up and give people something else to kind of watch, I guess. But the problem is, and I think, Daniel, you've made this point in the past, is that all these new territories, relatively new territories, because the cycling in the Middle East now is quite a well-established thing. When was the first Tour of Qatar? Back in 2002, I think, wasn't it? So it's coming up for not far off 20 years now that states in the Middle East have been showing an interest in professional cycling. But I think the traditional race organisers, in this case RCS, they've got the problem that they've got to try and sell a different flavour of cycling to people who are interested in hosting a race, and probably the people who are inviting the peloton over to race in Dubai. They want their version of the Tour de France or their version of the Giro, and probably aren't. It might be a harder sell to get them to do something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, maybe. I don't know.
Anything else from the desert? Daniel, you mentioned that you had spoke to Mark Cavendish out there about Julien Vermont, who, as I mentioned in my report from Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne, was off the front towards the end of the race, and quite disappointed, actually, in the end not to have made that move work. He's a rider who we are only really familiar with as a bit of a workhorse, aren't we? He's the guy who'd be sitting on the front for 100 kilometres of the stage for Quick Step, and it looks already like with Dimension Data, as though he will have with Dimension Data a slightly different role, perhaps.
Well, should we hear from Cavendish about him now, Rich? From my interview with Mark a couple of weeks ago in Dubai.
And the addition of Julian's been massive for us. Yeah. Like, I've seen him grow as a rider. He's such a good friend, such a good person. And that's the thing, at Quick Step, they've got such a strong team. Julian just rides on the front. But he's so much more than that. It's not like they didn't know what to do with the on the front. Like, they had such a strong team that Julian was riding on the front. Whereas here, he can really fit in. He can race a bit for himself. He can be part of the lead. He can do a bit more now at this team,
So that was Cavendish on his teammate Julien Vermont. As you could hear there, I mean, he's delighted that they managed to lure Vermont from Quick Step. Cavendish, talking about his lead-out train a couple of weeks ago in Dubai, was very confident they're going to have a fantastic team when the Tour de France comes around, with Van Rensburg, who was very impressive in the Tour last year, and Bursenhagen coming in as well. Cavendish, of course, crashed, didn't he, in Abu Dhabi? There were some concerns initially that he might have hurt his shoulder. They were inaccurate, the same shoulder that he fell on last year in the Tour de France. They were inaccurate, but he was concussed, I think, after his crash, and I understand he had to spend a couple of days in a hotel room with the curtains drawn. He wasn't allowed out into the daylight. And suffice to say, he was pretty bored. I got that from a source very close to Mark Cavendish.
What were the circumstances of the crash?
He was extremely bored. The circumstances for the crash were pretty farcical. The race director's car had automatic braking on it. I don't know how automatic braking works, but I think it basically, if something comes within a centimetre or two of the front or rear bumper, the brakes go on. Is that right?
Seems a bit weird, that, to me. But
yeah, but that is what happened, and I think the new Sky rider Leonardo Basso fell or hit the bumper just in front of Cavendish, and Cavendish hit Basso and came down.
Yeah, not great, because I would have fancied a win, but he's closely associated with that race, isn't he, Cavendish?
Yes, he is. And it was noticeable that he wasn't particularly critical of the automatic braking fiasco.
A little bit embarrassing.
Oh, you mean he's an ambassador for the event?
Correct.
Awkward. Anyway,
well, if you're going to bring down anyone, bring down the ambassador for the event. I mean, politically, you're going to get less criticism, aren't you?
Mark, if you're still listening to this in a darkened room, get well soon. And that was Lionel Birnie. On the subject of Mark Cavendish, he does feature in our latest Friends special. Orla Shinawee went to the Isle of Man and spoke to him and spoke to some of the other people involved in cycling there. And, it's a story of a quite remarkable cycling culture going back many decades. So it's a fascinating look at the Isle of Man. That's our latest Friends special. I've been working on another couple. They'll be out very soon. I hope you chaps are working on some Friends specials, are you?
Not really, Rich. But on the subject of darkened rooms, I saw a cycling film, last week or just over a week ago at the Berlinale. I'm going to say in Italian. I don't know how they came up with that name. So that's the famous Berlin film festival. The film was Time Trial. It is a film about the final year in the career of David Miller, made by a friend of the podcast, Finley Pretzel, and Sonia. How do you pronounce her surname, Rich? Is it Henrique? Henrique? I got that wrong.
Sonia.
No,
I just
you're
call
not
her
going to help
Sonia.
me. We just call her Sonia. Anyway, fabulous film that's been in the making for a few years now. I would describe it as a sort of modern iteration of, or a modern version of A Sunday in Hell or Stars and Water Carriers, those fantastic Jürgen Leth films in the 1970s. It really takes you inside the mind, inside the experience of a professional racer. It's not a typical sort of autobiographical or biographical documentary about David Miller. We don't hear from his family. We don't hear too much from his entourage. It really is designed to take you inside of the peloton. Visually, absolutely stunning, and I would recommend it to everyone if you can get to see it over the next few months. There are a few screenings in the next few weeks. There are going to be some screenings at the South by Southwest Festival in Austin, very famous film and arts festival. So that's on the 10th and the 11th and the 15th of March. In March, there are further screenings at the Tempo Film Festival in Stockholm, Sofia Film Festival in Bulgaria, and the CPH DOX Festival in Copenhagen.
Great. Well, we better get on with preparing for our live events. Hope to see as many of you as possible when we hit the road. But we're getting ready to go to Manchester tomorrow. Lionel and Daniel's joining us next week. We've got Francois Tomaso and Orla Shinawee with us this week as well. That's all for this week. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Lionel.
Good luck. Good luck on the tour, chaps.
Well, we'll see you next week.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lionel.
Thanks, Rich.
You have been listening to the Cycling Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate us and leave a review on Facebook and iTunes. Just search online for the Cycling Podcast. This episode was edited and produced by Matt Field.